Welcome to Philosophy15. I'm Robert Talisse. This is my colleague,
Scott Aikin.
We are the authors of Why We Argue and How We Should, A Guide to Political Disagreement. We talk for about 15 minutes at a stretch about some philosophical thing that we've been thinking about. No script, just whatever we happen to be wondering about today. And today, one of the things we're wondering about is cynicism about argumentation. What's up with that, Aikin?
What is argumentative cynicism? So maybe, I think that almost everybody who's sort of sat in on a philosophy class or seen people argue on stage doing debates and things like that has had a cynical moment where you just say, all this argumentation stuff, all this looks like you're getting reasons and data and looks like you're shaking your head in thoughtfulness whenever someone else is saying something, is all just so much nonsense, right? This is really what you're doing is you're trying to convince people of something. You're trying to be able to manipulate somebody. You're trying to get somebody to just believe something and go along with you. And this is just all just a big charade, right? That's the argumentative cynic's perspective, that it's all just a kind of something that makes the naked expression of power a little bit more palatable.
Or difficult to recognize.
Right, or maybe makes it just less naked.
Yeah.
Right, so
but
you
all the more sinister. All the more sinister.
All the more, yeah, that's right. So, right, it's like the fact that it looks like it's clothed up as something that looks like it's like, we're going to
appeal to reasons.
Yeah, it looks like it's even more objectionable in this regard.
Right.
So, now, one of the things that we had, that we've argued for in the book and in a handful of other places is that this argumentatively cynical view has a kind of self-refutation problem, right? It looks like what's happened here is that you might say the argumentative cynic has said, look at all you sheeple out there being led to slaughter or something like that, right? And I've realized something true, right? I've done some reasoning, right? Seen some truths. And the argumentative cynic then thinks that they are in a better epistemic or an intellectual position than others. They see a truth, they've reasoned their way to it.
They've got evidence that they can present. They can demonstrate to people who were just willing to have their eyes open to the fact that what poses as argument is really just, cynical politicking or the expression of power or the assertion of privilege.
Right. And so the self-refutation line is,
how'd you get there?
That was all the exercise of reason, wasn't it? Whenever you recruit people to your cause, or whenever you announce that you're a certain kind of cynic, or whenever you express the cynical view about somebody's exercise of reason, it looks like that you might call, Plato called it misology, right? That someone is a misologue, that they're against reason, that they hate reason, misos, right? So. Miseos. So anyhow, so it looks like the misologue, the cynic about argument, has got a kind of self-refutation problem. It looks like you can't consistently think that of yourself, or at least you can't think that your cynicism about argument is a kind of an intellectual achievement. Right. So if you think that it's an intellectual achievement and you call the other people sheeple, that means that you're in a better intellectual position than them, and there's something screwy about that thought.
Right. Even the thought.
If it's true, it can't be true.
Right. Well, even the thought that other people are being duped is no longer available to you.
Right.
You can't even see the people as sheeple, right? You can't
there's not
see them as
such a thing as dupery.
Yeah, right.
There's not such a thing as dupery.
Here's one of these wonderful sort of I don't know what to call them. It's sort of like what to make of this fact. Right. So on the one hand, Scott and I want to and have argued and want to continue arguing that argumentative cynicism is self-refuting. Right?
So we're done with it, right?
Yeah.
Are we done?
But then I think the cynic gets to
say stuff back, maybe.
Well, gets to jump a level even.
Or maybe just shrug, right? Isn't that what they do?
Yeah, the Richard Rorty shrug. But maybe.
Okay. Level jumping. Tell me how level jumping works.
So then to say, what you've just pointed to is yet a further reason to be cynical. That is, I'm cynical about first-order deployments of reasoning. you've shown me that the way I get to my cynicism about first-order deployments of reasoning requires me to do some first-order reasoning about which I should be cynical as well.
Right.
And so the second-order view that says, oh, look at this argumentation stuff is just all bullshit, right? Like, oh, now I should be cynical about that
That's right.
too? That sounds like a further confirmation of cynicism,
That's
not
right.
an undermining of
That's
it.
right. That's right. And so, so analogize this maybe to the skeptic, right? Where it's like the skeptic wants to say, look, I mean, in some ways, if the skeptic's view is going to be the kind of intellectual achievement it's supposed to be, as opposed to just, you might say, just shoulder shrugging
Right.
again, simple know nothingism, then it looks like you have the similar kinds of line, and the skeptic says back, but these are all principles that are internal to whatever the reason is that you're trying to defend, right? So presumably the cynic could say the exact same thing. You think that this self-refutation argument saves you, but look, what it does is it just shows that all these principles of reasoning that we've got get me to cynicism. You have to criticize the cynical argument, not just the fact that it's self-refuting, right? So if we analogize it to the skeptic, it looks like we're in a kind of a stranger place, right? Because at the very least, many Pyrrhonian skeptics said, no, the self-refutation argument brings you down too, man. We're all skeptics now. Right? So maybe the cynic would need to say, look, if you're looking to save reason here, you need to criticize the argument, not where the argument gets you.
Right, but that is a funny thing for the cynic to say.
Right.
Because I thought that it would be weird for the cynic to appeal to a concept like criticizing the argument.
Right.
Because the cynic, I thought, was committed to the view that there aren't arguments in that sense. So we're back to what looks like a self-refutation now.
But now again, so yeah, it looks like, but now the question here is who's got the self-refutation? The cynic wants to say that it's us,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Because we've said, look, if what you've said is true, it's got to be false, right?
That looks bad.
That looks bad for your view. Now again, we can always imagine the cynic in the sort of the proper cynical role, just shrugging his shoulders and walking away, right? Or just saying something like, look at how now you're twisting in the wind, right? Saying that it's a self-refutation argument. That's the last move of the defenders of reason, right? The last and most desperate moves of the defenders of reason. But am I right that the other strategy would be to say, okay, well, once we've recognized that if the self-refutation argument is supposed to be about the cynic's reasonings, then we are on the hook for criticizing the reasonings. So the cynic wants to say, if we just say we don't have to criticize your reasoning, he says, now the self-refutation argument is on you, right? Because now you're like, yeah, you cared all about the reasonings, but now you're not going to criticize a reasoning that's like that's against your most valued things.
Right.
Well, isn't that convenient, right?
Maybe, so good, right. So there is a standoff.
Yes, right.
And the standoff seems interminable because for every move, there's a compensating level jumping move available to whoever, well, on both sides,
On
right?
both sides, it looks like, yeah.
The non-cynical view of argument and the cynical view of argument are capable constantly of moving from first order to second order to even higher order and back down again. Right? Okay. And so a lot of the dispute seems to be really a dispute about what the appropriate terrain for the disagreement is.
Right.
I wonder if ultimately the cynic has to just shrug her shoulders at the very concept of self-refutation.
Yes, I think that's right.
That it's like, you can give me a self-refuting argument. If I am troubled by that, I've already lost, or I've already, maybe not lost, I've already set things up, so now I'm just playing for ties all the time.
That's right.
The way to win is just to say there's no such thing as self-refutation.
Right. Or you just say, right, there's no such thing as self-refutation, or you just say something like, that's just another one of your words, right? So, like, even saying, I'm now, right, because again, the no such thing view is, again, got this, I have an intellectual achievement that you fail to have.
Even that.
Right. So, again, it looks like it would still be open to the problem. You'd have to have this sort of like, you had this sort of old worry about, like, the Heracliteans, right, where it's like, it looked like the terms, and, like, once you realize how...
Yep.
Right, it's just and what are you left with? Just being able to wiggle your finger. I wonder if this seems so. If this consistency requirement keeps getting run, right? You'd say, now the question here is, okay, well, we see how the consistency requirement sort of, in some ways, either shows that the cynic is either self-refuting or just reduced to silence.
Right.
Right? Now the question is, okay, but remember that the cynic was also running the self-refutation argument on the rationalist, or the person who believes in reason. Is there a consistent way out for them? Unless you just say something like, yeah, now we're going to take a look at the cynic's arguments and not just show the fact that the conclusion is self-refuting. That would just still be a bad. That could still be a bad outcome for reason. If the line is no, what the self-refutation problem for the cynic shows is that there's something screwy about the reasoning. I don't know what it is yet. Right. It's like I've got a kind of criticism where it's like, look, I know that the reasoning's wrong. Why? Because we've got a false conclusion. So at least one of the premises is false, or one of the inferences is messed up. So that's got to be the way. And now you just say, okay, in exactly the same way in which, like, for example, Aristotle says, yeah, these people say crazy things that are contrary to common sense. So I know that they're wrong. What do I need to do now? Just use a diagnostic tool to figure out where their reasoning went wrong. Right. So we know that. So again, the thought is, if this self-refutation or silencing argument works against the cynic, then we have, at the very least, now we just turn to a diagnostic tool to say, okay, now I need to be able to say, here's where they went wrong. They made a hasty generalization over the fact that so many people are just bad at reasoning but pretend like they're really good, or something along those lines. Is that what you think? Does that sound like a decent strategy? Or
I just don't know. I mean, it also looks to me like a cynic. Why would the cynic even accept the thought that there's anything that could come out of anybody's mouth that would reduce him to not being able to say anything?
Right.
Why?
Right. Why is it reduction to silence? Why isn't it just more words?
Like, reduction to silence. Why? It doesn't matter. Right? Talking or not talking doesn't matter on the cynical view.
Right.
It's like there's no reason. And Cratylus was wrong. There's no reason to be reduced to wiggling your finger, because the proper cynic view is there's no such thing as a reductio. Sorry, folks. That's where we're at today.
Making a mess of it.
Should we end there?
Yeah.